Okay, good morning, everyone. I think we can begin. Welcome to this Iraq Initiative Conference, which is actually our 5th conference. So we're moving along and very happy to see that there's still so many of you interested on the topic of Iraq and the discussions that we will have. It's great to see so many people here. My name is Renad Mansour, and I have to remember to introduce myself, but I am a senior research fellow and director of the Iraq Initiative here at Chatham House. And the idea of this conference every year is to gather policymakers, analysts, civil society members, journalists, to talk about both the short-term trajectory of Iraq, what we've seen in the last year, what to expect in the next year, politics, economics, security, stability, the region, of course, but also to look at some of the deeper drivers of change or conflict, the economics, climate, demographics, energy transitions, and these bigger questions for all of us to put our heads together to think through some potential solutions looking forward. And while Iraq seems to be turning a corner in its state-building process, today we're in a place in Iraq where things seem stable, the economy seems to be stabilizing, of course the security situation is stabilizing. We've seen this before as well. So what are some of the roots that we need to continue to discuss today to make sure that any change is sustainable? And that's why we're all here today. And of course, the violence in the region is also a big discussion that we'll have later today. The violence in Israel and Palestine is deeply troubling. The Hamas attack and Israel's response, with the UN warning of genocide potentially in Palestine, is something that obviously will feature in conversations this year. And this conference is on Iraq, but later we will have a discussion on its implications. Because the case of Iraq teaches us that a military solution followed by a political settlement without accountability doesn't stabilize. And so the theme this year is accountability. And how can we push forward accountability into the political settlement to ensure that the military solution and the political bargain can sustain? And we are very grateful for the sponsors of and supporters of the Iraq Initiative, Crescent Petroleum and the Swades family. And that's all for me for now. Without further ado, I'll introduce my colleague, Neil Quilliam, Chatham House Associate Fellow, to chair the first panel.
Thank you, Renat. Just to repeat, I'm Neil Quilliam. I'm an Associate Fellow at the Middle East Program here at Chatham House. I'm also Research Director for Think Research and Advisory. I'm really pleased to welcome you to our first session 1 year on. Just a couple of housekeeping points. We will be providing simultaneous translation from Arabic throughout this conference, so please do make use of your headsets. This is not being held under the Chatham House rule, so we are on the record, and we would encourage you to tweet or whatever you do these days using hashtag Iraq Initiative. We will be encouraging all, we do have an online audience as well, so we're sort of in person and online. We'll be encouraging our online audience to drop questions in the bar, and we will be coming to the audience after we've had some opening remarks from our speakers. And I will be asking you to raise your hand, wait for the microphone, introduce yourself, and then put your question to our speakers. I'll just begin with a brief introduction to our 4 eminent speakers. We have sat on my far left, His Excellency Rubar Ahmed, who is Minister of the Interior for the KRG. He oversees agencies including police, narcotics, human trafficking, and border enforcement. He's also responsible for heading the KRG's board for implementing UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, as well as the Ministerial Committee recognizing ISIS crimes against Yazidis as genocide. He leads the Committee for the Constitutional Article 140 implementation and liaises with Baghdad on security in disputed areas, the Sinjar Agreement, and Iraq-Iran Security Agreement. He played a crucial role in the Kurdistan Region Security Council, particularly against ISIS with coalition forces. His expertise led to his 2022 Iraqi presidency nomination. Then we're joined online and on screen by Abbas al-Amari. He's a senior political advisor to the Iraqi Parliament. He is also the Secretary General of the Shiite Coordination Framework and the State Administration Coalition, which recently formed the government. Mr. al-Amari is from Nasiriyah and is currently pursuing his PhD in political studies at the University of Bahrain. He held various positions within the Iraqi parliament, political and media institutions in Iraq. He has presented at various conferences and has published widely on the political situation in Iraq. To my left, we have Lahib Hegel, who is a senior analyst on Iraq for ICG. She's worked in Iraq and on the Kurdistan region in various capacities since 2013. Prior to ICG, she worked on mediation efforts in Iraq, Libya, and Syria for the Dialogue Advisory Group. She's worked as a security advisor for the International NGO Safety Organization and conducted research for a wide range of organizations and institutions, including the EU, UNDP, minority rights group, on topics such as displacement, security, and politics in Iraq. Bernard has already introduced himself, so I'm not going to take up 3 minutes reading your bio, but I think you're well known to all of us. I'm going to put questions to each of our speakers, but before I do that, I'll entreat our minister to take the podium and just share with us his opening remarks, please. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests. I am pleased to join you today for this year's Iraq Initiative Conference. Before I share my perspective, I would like to extend my gratitude to Chatham House for inviting me to speak. For over a century, Chatham House has been playing a great role in promoting open discussions on foreign policy questions for beyond the United Kingdom. It's through open dialogue that we can collectively address the complex challenge of state building and governance in Iraq and beyond. Our presence here today acknowledges that there are issues that need attention, emphasizing our shared commitment to shaping a future that caters to the diverse groups in Iraq. That is what I hope we can do today, to debate our problems as openly as I can and debate matters that have often been told behind closed doors. We meet at a time of a great uncertainty in the Middle East. In April last year, Prime Minister, His Excellency Masroor Barzani, spoke from this very podium, warning that the Middle East remains an unpredictable driver of world events with a proven potential to be a mass global disruptor. Recent events in the Middle East remind us of the consequences of turning away from the Middle East and not addressing the root causes, but focusing on treating the symptoms instead in a bid to silence what has often been unpopular to discuss publicly. Iraq has not been spared from this challenge. Since the overthrow of the dictatorship more than 20 years ago, Iraq's progress to a federal system remains largely incomplete. Constitutional safeguards designed to prevent the tragedies of the past and the insecurities of the future for Kurds, Sunnis, and Shia have been openly challenged. Some of these provisions have been entirely reversed, threatening the power-sharing configuration with the KRG and undermining the constitution all the parties voluntarily embraced in 2005. There is still important work left to be done to fully transition from Iraq's long history of centralization to a fully fledged federal system. Progress on land disputes with supervision from the United Nations would signal goodwill to Kurdish families who continue to be expelled from their ancestral lands in Kirkuk. The establishment of a second chamber or Federation Council would anchor a federal system, and the revenue sharing law that gives each group a stake in their future would bring about trust in ways that are currently missing. This cycle of distrust deserves a closer look. We in the Kurdistan region have been patient, but our duties have not translated into meaningful rights. Agreements meant to give us a monthly share of the federal budget have been repeatedly violated, robbing us of basic citizen rights. This should not be allowed to continue. As I stand here today, 20 years after the removal of the former regime, I can't help but feel that our people deserve better, as do all Iraqis. We all aspire to a federal system where everyone, regardless of ethnic or religious background, would enjoy irreversible rights, economic benefits, and individual security, all under a federal umbrella. That hasn't happened. At times, it has seemed like every group has had to fend for itself to secure its future, relying on the goodwill of individual politicians in Baghdad or, even worse, neighboring countries. This has hampered progress aimed to enhancing Iraq's security. This has been made clear with what has now become almost routine drone attacks into the Kurdistan region. This has jeopardized the post-ISIS recovery too, threatening to trigger a new wave of displaced families. The Yazidis issue remains unsolved. The Sanjar agreement, signed more than 3 years ago, remains abstract. Armed groups, militias, and the PKK continue to occupy the area. A local government has yet to be elected, and the Yazidi people, who have waited for too long to return to their ancestral homeland, continue to long for a future where they can live in safety and dignity, a future they can shape on their own terms. It's easy to say that the odds are against Iraq, but we in the Kurdistan region still believe that real progress can be achieved if we acknowledge that the starting point should not be a debate over an outright return to the pre-federal Iraq or an end of constitutional protections. It must instead be about building upon what has been achieved. That is why we are here today, to be humble about the failures since 2005, openly discuss what could change, and determine the best way to do it. I can't think of any other institution than Chatham House that can credibly provide a better forum for debating these questions and ideas. I look forward to taking part in what I am confident will be a fruitful debate over the next couple of hours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Abbas, if I may call you Abbas, I'm going to turn straight to you, please. I'm sure you may have some responding remarks to that. But more broadly, I mean, considering, we are 1 year on, as our session kind of determines, I wondered if you could perhaps sort of elucidate on maybe some of the progress made over that year. I mean, obviously there's a lot going on in the region. There have been some positive signs in Iraq in terms of where the oil prices, at least, the economy is looking a little healthier than it was, and there's a greater sense of stability. But perhaps you could talk us through where where the reforms have got to, if they've got anywhere, and what are the challenges ahead, but also bearing in mind the Minister's remarks, please. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. شكرا جزيلا لتشاتم هاوس وللأخوة الأعزاء في إدارة هذه الجلسة. ممنون لإتاحة هذه الفرصة، وأرحب بالزملاء الموجودين على المنصة، السيد الوزير ريبر والأستاذ ريناد والسيدة لهيب. ما يتعلق Do you have translation there? May I go talking Arabic? Yes. ما يتعلق بالإصلاحات الاقتصادية، إذا حضرتك تقصد أن ما يتعلق بالبرنامج الحكومي والوعود التي كانت فيه من أجل الإصلاحات الاقتصادية، كما تعلم جنابك أن هنالك لجنة مشكلة، لجنة الإصلاح الاقتصادي بهذا الاسم، وهي تعمل على القطاعات النفطية، المصرفية، المالية والاقتصادية بشكل عام. حسب ما يرفض به ائتلاف إدارة الدولة بشكل يعني نصف شهري من قبل دولة رئيس الوزراء السيد السوداني، هنالك تقدم واضح في هذا المنحى. أما ما يتعلق بسعر النفط، لدينا متغيران هنا، متغير سعر النفط ومتغير سعر صرف الدولار. هذان المتغيران لا أعتقد بأنهما as you say pure بإيد الحكومة، وإنما هي تتعلق بقضايا التفاعلات الدولية، وأيضا بسلطة القوة العظمى الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية ورغبتها في إدارة التفاعلات بشكل يتفق مع سياستها. لذلك نجد أن هنالك صعود وهبوط بالدولار، وهو يعني خارج التوقعات، لاعتقادنا بأن السياسة المالية التي يمضي بها العراق سياسة يعني مرسومة ومتفق عليها مع الخزانة الأمريكية ومع الفيدرالي الأمريكي، ولكن وهنالك رقابة شديدة من قبل القوى الداخلية للسلطة والحكومة عبر الأمن الوطني أو هيئة النزاهة أو حتى عبر اللجان الخاصة لمتابعة الفساد الاقتصادي. ولكن هنالك صعود بالدولار غير متوقع، وأعتقد أن له دخل في التوازنات الموجودة في المنطقة، خصوصا بعد الصدمة الجيوسياسية في طوفان الأقصى.
Thank you, Abbas. Thank you very much. Lahib, I'm going to turn to you now. I'll be asking, Renard, 20 years later, but at the moment, is Iraq in the post-conflict phase? Is it correct to kind of characterize it as that? Or is this just like I was going to say pause, but that's not a great choice of word. Is this just a moment where things aren't happening?
Thank you, Neil, and thank you for Chatham House for organizing this event. Maybe we could say that Iraq has been in several post-conflict phases, but somehow it appears that Iraq is always at risk of being dragged back into conflict. And over the last year in particular, we've seen stability that has been quite unprecedented. Also in terms of Iraq's kind of regional role in conflict, we've seen so-called truce, unilateral truce on part of many of the armed groups that are aligned with Iran. Many of them are now represented in government. That held until 7 October, and we've started seeing some escalation again. It might be a little bit too early to say where that will go. But to leave that aside for a moment, I want to pick up on a few things that the minister mentioned. Iraq is facing several structural issues that go beyond the current government, that every prime minister since 2005 has faced. But to give some credit to the current government, I think that it has tried to navigate a very difficult regional situation. It has clearly shown an intent to balance foreign policy between East and West in the region, but also East and West globally. Now, again, this might be turned around due to the last month's events in the region. But I think it has been an important signal in economic terms and for investors that are looking at Iraq, and also when it comes to security. Internally, however, I think that we're still facing some serious challenges. The minister mentioned budget disputes between the KRG and Baghdad. The disputed territories remain a serious challenge, both in Kirkuk, where we unfortunately a couple of months ago saw violence again erupt, and even casualties among Kurdish protesters. And the Sinjar agreement remains unimplemented. Now, I've looked at Sinjar specifically over the last few years, and although I wanted to give the Sinjar agreement the opportunity to maybe to some extent be implemented, I also think that there were parts of it that were quite unrealistic, in the sense that we have a security constellation in Sinjar that is a reality. It is very difficult to imagine that you can go back to the status quo pre-ISIS. And I'm happy to discuss that further. But I think that if I'm going to pick out one positive thing here between Baghdad and Erbil over the last year, it has been, in particular, the cooperation around the question of Iranian Kurdish opposition groups in Iraq. It's maybe one of the few issues where Baghdad and Erbil have worked together. There's been joint delegations of KRG and federal officials going to Tehran. Iraq has managed to prevent further escalation with its neighbor, or even the potential of Iran establishing some sort of buffer zone on Iraqi Kurdistan territory, similarly to what we've seen, the Turks have had over decades. So I think I'll stop at that one, and we can come back to some of these issues later.
Great, thank you so much. Renad, I remember thinking in 2009, I was asked to sort of describe Iraq to one of my colleagues at the time, and I kind of described it as a train just ready to leave the station. It was sort of it was heading in one direction. The train had been reassembled, and it was heading out. You sort of in your opening remarks, you talked of sort of being in a better place and maybe heading towards a different trajectory. We used to share an office, of course, and we used to talk about this. Is this any different to where we've been maybe 10 years ago? Is Iraq really in a different place, or is it just like more of the same? Is it just sort of in a holding pattern? Things are looking good, but I think, as Lahib said, there are deep structural problems that need to be managed or addressed.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think clearly the 20-year history of Iraq is cyclical. And so we are in a place right now where, in terms of state building, there's relative stability from direct violence. The economy is doing better because of a relatively good high oil price. But what we now need to discuss is how do we make this stable and sustainable? There are bigger challenges that Iraq faces: demographics, economic policy in general, to be more than just the day after, but to look for a 10, 20-year trajectory. And over the last few years, we've made the point that corruption matters, and studying corruption and putting corruption on the agenda matters for three reasons. One, corruption shows you how the political system actually works, right? None of these, we know how a state works from abroad. Looking at the system of corruption in Iraq gives you exactly what power looks like and how to navigate power. It's the system. Two, corruption kills, and therefore is destabilizing. Corruption in the medical sector, for example, means that most medicine in Iraq is fake. Corruption in health and safety means that a hospital can catch on fire, or a wedding venue can catch on fire, killing hundreds. So two, corruption kills. And three, corruption is the ultimate impediment to reform. So if you talk to people who have tried reform programs across Iraq the last 20 years, whether it's security sector reform or it's economic reform, technical reform, it's always the technical solutions are there, but you always hit a wall, you always hit a ceiling, and that ceiling is political will. And that political will is driven by the system of corruption that we're talking about. So the question, therefore, that we're looking to ask and to push forward is, how do we pass that? How do we get to a place where there is political will for genuine, meaningful reform to address the roots of the problems, so we don't just go back to that cycle of conflict? And that's why we're focusing on accountability, because we need to face the facts that Iraq's elites are not going to reform themselves. The system works for them, and there needs to be other ways, right? They're across the board, they've had impunity for 20 years. So rule of law becomes important. Accountability becomes important. The commissions of integrity, the parliament's committees on finance and integrity, the Federal Board of Supreme Audits, these institutions have been captured and are unable to uphold the rule of law. Society has also been captured. It is much more difficult to protest or to have civil society or to tweet. Right? We've seen in the last few years as well mechanisms of repression using penal codes and articles from the Saddam era against civil society. So if these tools of accountability, whether the bureaucratic ones that I've mentioned or the societal ones, are unable to do their job, which is to hold this elite to account, we need to start thinking in different ways. How can we strengthen? We know that not everyone in the system is corrupt. And we also know that public pressure matters, right? It still matters to the elites. That's why every elite claims they're anti-corruption. They all say we're against corruption because they know they can't present themselves as corrupt. So there are people in the system, and public pressure matters. How do you strengthen the connective tissues of that? So you can create these mechanisms of accountability that can begin to address some of the roots as to why Iraq is still on the cycles of conflict.
So do you have a paper on this?
Yes, we have a paper coming out as part of the Iraq initiative on this. Yeah. I should have said that. I'm not very good at this, but yeah. Stay tuned.
You'll be coming out with recommendations?
Yes.
Excellent. I'm sure we'll be excited about that. Thank you, Renat. Minister, I mean, you gave your sort of opening remarks, which is very much appreciated. I wondered if you could just reflect a little bit more on the state of relations between Erbil and Baghdad, please. That's obviously, gone through different phases over the past 20 years. So maybe just give the audience a kind of a recap where we are. Thank you.
Well, thank you again. I will start from another approach, not from the administration or the political issues. I believe the problem in Iraq is a problem of mentality, where we are not ready to accept each other as a partners. So all of other issues will be a consequence of that issues. And the main part is to achieve something to change the mentality. And I believe this will take more time. When all of the international partners are talking about the democracy and the freedom and a new process in Iraq, they all are just dealing with the conduct of the process. They are neglecting the root causes of the problem in Iraq. We have to be brave to tackle the root causes of the problem. The root causes is that nobody is ready to accept others. Who is running in Baghdad, no matter is Shia or Sunni? We examine the 8 years of authority running by Sunni, and now we are examining the same thing by our partners as Shia. The problem is how we will reach a point to accept each other as a real partner and as a citizen on the first level in this country. So this has not happened till now. So therefore, we will continue to face this kind of problem in different time and in different shapes. But it's a circle. We are just moving in a circle. We are not moving in a right direction. It's much different that you are moving for the last century in a circle without achievement. Till now, Iraq is not functioning as a factor of stability in the region, internally and regionally, and even within the stability of the global stability. So this is our duty as an Iraqi, and we ask for our partners to support this idea, not just to deal with the governments, to launch a process for mentality change. It's not coming for day and night, and the 2 decades is not enough. We need more decades if there will be a real will to achieve this change. Therefore, we are facing the same problem as it was before, but with some change. There is another prime minister in position. His Excellency, Mr. Sudani, I believe he is one of the best. He showed his will to solve the problems. But parallel to this government, there is others who are stopping any kind of effort from the prime minister to solve the problem, toward the Shia, toward the Sunni, toward the Kurds, toward the other minorities in Iran. This is the main question. When the prime minister in Iraq will be much powerful to implement the government agenda and the political agreement which led to have a new cabinet in Iran. We are part of the new cabinet. We are very supportive to the new cabinet, and we are pushing forward and looking forward to have more achievement within the new cabinet. And with it, we have a new budget agreement at the beginning. One of the best agreements between Erbil and Baghdad. It was an effort done by the Prime Minister Masroor Barzani with the Prime Minister Sudani. They are in a very good relation. In daily basis, they are talking to each other. And when this draft went to the parliament, many things had been changed. And even if it will be passed through the parliament, there will be another course of remarks from the federal court. And if it will pass, there will be another issue. So we are in a very good relation with the government, working very close to each other and admitting good solutions. But the problem is not the 2 governments. There is another will out of the government process, will much powerful and able to stop everything. So if you talk about the normalizing the situation in disputed area or implementing the Article 140, it's the same. Talk about the Sanjar agreement. The Prime Minister launched a new process, but others stopped the process very recently. We are in a very good relation with the government institutions, with the National Security Advisor, with the different ministers, Minister of Interior, Minister of Defense, other ministers who are dealing with us in Baghdad. But the problem is not these positions. So how we will be brave to tackle these issues? I think it's the main point. Otherwise, we can, as an Iraqi, we can achieve.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Abbas, I'm going to turn it over to the audience in a minute for questions, but did you have any comments you wanted to make in response to what you've just heard from the panelists? I thought you might. I don't think we can hear you. Sorry, I think we have an issue with sound. Thank you.
Do you have my voice now?
Thank you.
بكل تأكيد لدي تعليق على كلام السيد ريبر. جنابك كنت موجود في أول اجتماع مع السيد مسعود برزاني عندما ذهبنا كوفد مع دولة رئيس الوزراء الذي كان مرشحا من قبل الإطار، وجنابك أيضا موجود في كل الوفود الكردستانية التي تأتي لتفاوض سواء مع الحكومة أو مع الإطار التنسيقي أو في إدارة الدولة. وأنت تسمع الكلام الذي كان يجري. ليس طبعا النقطة الأولى التي أريد أن أسجلها أن رئيس الوزراء له مطلق الحرية في التصرف وفي العمل، لكن ليس الإعاقة من قبل ما أشرت إليه ضمنا من القوى السياسية الشيعية، بل هو عدم استجابة متقابلة أيضا من حكومة الإقليم. هنالك بعض القضايا تتعلق بالإقليم، والوفد الأخير الذي جاء لمناقشة الموازنة اعترف بذلك وقال لابد أن نتنازل جزء شيئا ما، وهو ما يتعلق برواتب الموظفين. هذا مثل يعني أنا أتمنى من حضرتك وأنت وزير وفاعل وشخص سياسي أن تمارس أيضا دورا وجهدا لفتح يد رئيس الوزراء لأن يكون قادرا على تنفيذ هذه الاتفاقيات بالتعاون معه في تقديم تسهيلات أيضا من إقليم كردستان. صحيح ما أشرت إليه أن هنالك علاقة مميزة بين رئيس الوزراء السيد محمد شيع السوداني والسيد مسرور بارزاني، وهنالك ثقة. في أول اجتماع بعد اجتماع السيد مسعود بارزاني ذهبنا إلى السيد مسرور وقال له رئيس الوزراء بالحرف الواحد عندما كان مكلفا أنني لا أعطي أي وعد خارج الدستور والقانون، ولكنني أعتقد أن كل حقوق كردستان هي ضمن القانون والدستور. لنجعل من هذه الوعود قضايا مطبقة ونحولها من قضية الممكن، من منطقة الممكن إلى منطقة الجاري والمنفذ بالتعاون المتقابل. الثقة لا تبنى والتفاعل لا يبنى من طرف واحد يا سيدي الفاضل وأخي العزيز. أعتقد أن هنالك تحديات أيضا تواجه إقليم كردستان، هي تحديات داخلية. بناء الثقة انتقل جنابك تحدث عن موضوع جدا مهم، وهي how to change the mentality، كيف نغير طريقة التفكير. الآن أعتقد أن المشكلة بين الحكومة الاتحادية وحكومة إقليم كردستان بدأت تتضاءل كثيرا في وجود حكومة السيد السوداني وفي وجود الإطار التنسيقي الذي هو أيضا يعني حليف لحضراتكم، ولكن هنالك عدم ثقة بين الأطراف الكردية أيضا. هذه واحدة من عوائقنا في تطبيق الاتفاق السياسي، كان المشكلة بين الاتحاد والبارتي، وأيضا قضية الرواتب وقضية المتقاعدين. يعني ليس كل شيء يتعلق بحكومة المركز أو بالقوى السياسية في بغداد. الفيدرالية التي أشرت لها تعيش أفضل حالاتها يا سيدي الفاضل، وجنابك الآن تأتي كوزير عندما تأتي إلى بغداد، وأعتقد أن السنة لم يديروا الحكم لمدة 20 الفترة التي حكم فيها صدام ومن قبله هي ليست فترة حكم السنة، إنما هو حكم باسم السنة. وكذلك الحكم 20 سنة التي مرت 21 سنة هو ليس حكم الشيعة، بل هو حكم ديمقراطية توافقية يشترك بها الجميع، بل ويعيقها كثير. هنالك أنا لا أريد أن أتحدث، احنا في جو أكاديمي، لا أريد أتحدث بطريقة الشو اللي في الإعلام، ولكن هنالك إعاقات من أطراف داخلية وأطراف خارجية لحركة ونمو هذا المشروع الديمقراطي الذي بدأ في 9/4/2003. ليس هنالك حكم سني أو شيعي أو ما شابه، إنما هنالك حكم ديكتاتوري لفرد وحزب، وهنا حكم توافقي تشاركي لم ينجح لعدة أسباب والجميع يشترك بهذا. أنا هذه النقاط اللي حبيت أعلق على السيد ريبر مع اعتذار الشديد لحضرته.
Thank you very much, Abbas. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to open the floor to questions, please. I see a question just over here. If you could just raise your hand in the middle, please. We'll come back in a minute. Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you very much. If you could just take the microphone, just this lady right next to you. Thank you very much.
Hi.
Thank you very much.
Alana Chavez. I'm working at the moment for something called the Coalition for Just Reparations.
Sorry, could you put the microphone a little closer?
Thank you. 1 year into the Sudani premiership, would the panel agree that now is the time to address other serious structural issues in Iraq? For example, the imprisonment of thousands of young men who have been imprisoned on false ISIS allegations. And I won't go into detail, but I know of a particularly awful case and father and 3 children were accused by a serving Ramadi police officer who is still serving today. And after they returned to Ramadi from Erbil, after living as IDPs, after the liberation of the city, and they were accused because the police officer had moved into their home, and he wanted to get rid of them. Anyway, 5 years on, I've been speaking to, members of the diplomatic community,
Sorry,
UN.
Can we just go directly to the
Yes,
question?
sorry.
We'll move
Okay,
on. Thank you.
So where is the political will now to address long-standing issues of injustice in Iraq? I wonder whether the panel could speak a little bit about the proposed amnesty law, and whether progress will be made this year or this coming year.
Thank you. That's a great question. Thank you very much. I'm going to take a second question here in the front row, sort of in second row in the middle. Yes, this gentleman here. Thank you so much. If you could give me your name and affiliation. Thank you. And question to the panel.
Thank you. It's my name is Mustafa. I'm a chairman of the Barzani Charity Foundation in UK, and I'm an ECOSOC representative of the Barzani Foundation in Geneva. And thank you for the panel, for the Excellency Minister and everyone else, Mr. Abbas. I actually want to talk about, I have my concern. I want to have a question about the humanitarian issue of Kurdistan. Of course, it's going to be very quick, but I'm not good to talk quickly anyway. It's obviously in Iraq, not the lack of implementation of the Sinjar agreement obviously have a severe impact of the AZD specifically, as well as other IDPs who they are located in Kurdistan region. His Excellency the Minister know very well that they are living in a very terrible situation because the funding from the international NGOs, UN agencies, and everyone else has been obviously withdrawn or has been diverted to somewhere else. And I think it's the policy of the Iraqi government that to really minimize the aid for them in order to force them back or kind of voluntarily go back to their homeland. But the security issue in the region, specifically in Sinjar, actually it's very fragile, which we believe that is going to it's take a longer time for people to go back home. So my question for His Excellency the Minister, as well as Mr. Abbas, while the KRG and the Iraqi government, as well as the international community, come together to agree upon how they exactly to handle the situation, especially security situation in that region, would it be not fair for those people to be aided, to be looked after better than they actually right now? Because from our point of view, the database available to everyone, and this is evidence, it's not a fact-based evidence that the Iraqi government actually have withdrawn almost, I wouldn't say exactly 100%, but 90% of the aid they should give out to the IDP have not been. And as well as, last point really, it's very important, we have a lot of refugees from Syria. Actually, they haven't been recognized by the Iraqi government as a refugee at all. So also, again, this is a burden of the KRG as well as the people of Kurdistan to look after those people, which is they are a national of Iraq.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you've made your point very clearly, and I think the question is very clear. Thank you. I'm going to ask the panel to pick up those points. I know the Minister wants to come back on some of the points that Abbas had made, but I'm actually going to go to you first, particularly on this kind of Sinjar agreement and the issue the gentleman was picking up, please.
Well, I think the question was directed to the Minister, but...
I know it was, but
okay.
you said you were going to come back to this, so I really like to...
Sure. I mean, look, I think that, as you said, there's a lack of attention and interest to this issue internationally, and in Iraq too. So as much as the KRG would like to see the Sinjar agreement implemented, and I think still some in Baghdad, would want to act on it, there's a reality on the ground that prevents it. Now, that doesn't mean that you cannot support IDPs better wherever they are displaced, or even try to support the return for some of them by securing certain areas of Sinjar. But in reality, you need to resolve the governance issue and the security structure first, because people are afraid of returning for good reasons. And I think that the way that the Sinjar agreement is designed, some of the conditions, especially when it comes to security actors, and that goes for both the KRG, Baghdad, and also Turkey to some extent, right? So, if you come to an agreement on governance that includes the Yebeshe, or that is seen as an extension of the PKK, you would have to devise that very surgically in order not to attract new forms of escalation in Sinjar. And it appears that that question has not been resolved, and neither the KRG or Baghdad actually has an answer for that.
Thank you. Minister, please.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I thank you, my friend, Mr. Abbas, for his comments, but he did say nothing, just explain about my speech, and arguing the speech. We are in a very good relation with the government in Baghdad. I agree. And yes, I attend the majority of the meetings which led to have a new cabinet. And therefore, we are part of the process and we are supporting the cabinet. But the problem is not the cabinet itself. And I didn't mention who. I didn't mention the framework. I didn't mention the militias. I didn't mention the militaries. I didn't mention anyone. It's not just the framework, to be honest. It's others. Maybe all of Iraqis are part of the problem. It's not just one part or one side. Because I mentioned the problem is the mentality. So all of us are sharing this mentality. It's not just a Shia problem, it's not just a others problem or Sunni. Yes, there is some areas much better than others, but everybody is sharing the same mentality, not accepting each other. The only example of successful of coexistence in Iraq is in Kurdistan. And this is a culture, this is a value. It's not for the media, for the politicians. We believe in this way. Therefore, when any Iraqi individuals are facing problem in any single province, the only area they will seek is the Kurdistan. And therefore, who are running now in Baghdad, they were in Kurdistan before 2003. They were in Kurdistan and they were fighting side by side with Peshmerga against the dictatorship. And Kurdistan will remain that safe haven for everyone who try to build a new country. And therefore, nowadays, we are still hosting about 1 million IDPs and refugees. All of these IDPs, the majority of these IDPs are from Sinjar. I mentioned that the Prime Minister launched a new process very willingly, but someone stopped him. I will not mention it. And maybe my brother Abbas, he knows who stopped him. But this is the reality. When we are in a good relation with Baghdad through the Prime Minister, within some ministers, others are interfering in this between. So there will not be gap for achieve. Therefore, I mentioned it's not the individuals, it's a mentality process which needs decades, not just in a part of Iraq, in everywhere in Iraq, even not just in Iraq, in the Middle East. The problems in the Middle East is the mentality problem. We are not ready to accept each other. In Europe, in everywhere in the world, they passed this era before centuries. It was the same. It was a mentality problem. So all of us are human beings. This is the question. And if we turn to the Sinjar agreement, I was who signed the agreement with Baghdad. And it's signed in the Ministry of Interior in Erbil before 3 years. We spent 2 years to reach this agreement. Different political figures in Baghdad, they were negotiated with us in different levels. At the end of the day, we came out with this agreement. I'm not agree with you that the conditions are not supportive to be achieved on the ground. We spent 2 years, and we were not ready to spend more years to wait whether they will be able to implement it or not. Not we, the people were not ready to wait. And this will lead to a demographic change directly in Sinjar and directly in Nineveh Plain, because it's the same process with the Christian. Christians are not ready to go back to Nineveh Plain because of the militias, because of that, some groups who are controlling the area they are not ready to accept others. The mentality is with everyone, Nineveh, Sinjar, everywhere in Iraq. So I'm asking for a new process to accept each other, to change the strategy, not refusing others. My brother Abbas said that this is the best time for the federalism. I'm arguing this issue. Where is the federalism? Where your share of revenue is now much less than 10 years before. 10 years before or 15 years before, at the beginning, our share of revenue was 17%. Now, they changed it to 12.6. And from this 12.6, they are giving us just 5 to 6%, because 45 of the Iraqi budget will go to the sovereign issues. And we are not getting any pence of this 45%. So the 12.6 is reach out from our ratio from 55. So we are getting just 5 or 6%. Where is the federalism where the federal court is stopping the Kurdistan parliament, where they are trying to shrinking the KRI? They are trying to make more pressure in different ways, economically, security, politically. And they are not sharing anything, power with us in Baghdad. We are signing agreement, political agreement, government agenda. Nothing had been achieved. I mentioned in my speech, the Federation Council is the main symbol of the federalism. There is no Federation Council. And even there is no intent to have a new law. The carbohydrate law, it was one of the main part of the political agreement to form a new cabinet. It's one of the main part of the cabinet agenda. Nothing had been achieved. Stop exportation of our oil and gas.
If I could ask you just to wrap up,
Yes,
Minister, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Renard, we've heard the term political will. We've heard the term mindset, which I don't want to get into because that tends towards Orientalism, so I'm not too comfortable with that. And we've had a question about the viability of consociationism. Is that still a viable solution for Iraq? That's a big question, but can you maybe sort of try to piece those three together? Political will, mindset.
I can do it in 30 seconds too, if you like.
Go on.
Look, I think to reiterate one point, which is important, when we're talking about this question of mentality, political will, these issues, consociationalism, this is a political settlement imposed on Iraq 20 years ago, where the elites work together to share the state. Who's missing in all of this are the people, the society that has lived through structural violence and different types of corruption, and suffered, like the point on the justice system and the accountability that is missing. So what I would say is the problem isn't necessarily, as was once really prolific in sort of media narratives, Shia versus Sunni, Kurd versus Arab. The real problem for most Iraqis are elites versus their people, right? The people versus their elites. The same is true in Basra, in Baghdad, and in Erbil in Kurdistan. right? Systems of governance, we need to be discussing how they can make them more representative, whether it's local or federal. That is the conversation. It's not ethnic and sectarian tensions, but it's the instrumentalization of identity that is failing.
Thank you. I'm going to turn back to the floor. Thank you. This woman on the second row, please. Thank you. Yes, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Welcome all. I have got two questions. One is.
Just put the mic a little closer. Just put it a bit closer. No, it's fine.
No, it's okay.
Just.
Okay.
Just a bit closer. That's all.
Okay.
There we go.
I have got two questions. One for. Can't be only one. I have got two. Sorry, one question first for Mr. Rebel Ahmed. Mr. Rebel Ahmed, how many years we are suffering from lack of budget, and how long can we survive? Our generation after fail of regime, now they are 20 plus, all educated. So all of them, a lot of them are without jobs, no future. So how long can our generation survive with this behavior of the government, central government? And my second question is for Mr. Abbas. So Mr. Abbas said past Iraq, like during Saddam Hussein, was a party power government, and now is democratic government. So if it's a democratic, I'm asking Mr. Abbas, so if it's a democratic, it should be democratic for anyone and everyone in Iraq. So Kurdistan is still part of Iraq. So what is going on with the cutting of the budget since 2013, before the ISIS attacked Kurdistan and Iraq? The budget has been cut time to time. And now we see one issue after the other is coming to Kurdistan, and all is mentioned and produced by Iraqi government. How long Iraq will call themselves a democratic country and a federal country? That's my question for Mr. Abbas.
Thank you very much. That's great. I'm going to just go directly to Abbas now just to answer that one. Thank you so much.
شكرا جزيلا شكرا للملاحظات المهمه سيد ريبر، وان شاء الله استكمال النقاش سيكون ان شاء الله في بغداد او اربيل مع حضرتك. شكرا للسيده اللي سالت. اكيد ان هنالك حاله ديمقراطيه وحاله مؤسفه. ما يحدث ما يتعلق بالموازنه، موازنه اقليم كردستان، هو حاله مؤسفه. والسيد ريبر قطعا يعرف، وانا كنت مكلف من قبل يعني الأخوة في سواء دولة الرئيس أو الإطار في متابعة ذلك في القاعة، وحتى وصلت إلى حالة شد مع أعضاء اللجنة المالية. أنا شخصيا حصلت لي شد مع أعضاء اللجنة المالية لعدة أبواب، منها هو وجوب تنفيذ الاتفاق مع اقليم كردستان، وأن هذا حق وليس منا شعبنا في كردستان. ولكن مع شديد الأسف هنالك أشياء ليس محلها هنا للذكر. هنالك تفاصيل تحتاج إلى جلسات متعددة إلى حلها، لكن ما يجري حالة ديمقراطية كبيرة في مفردة الموازنة. هنالك ظلم يتعرض له مجموعة كبيرة، خصوصا الموظفون والمتقاعدون في إقليم كردستان. وفعلا هنالك نحتاج إلى جهد مضاعف ومشترك بين الحكومة الاتحادية وحكومة الإقليم لحل هذه المشكلة.
Thank you very much. Did you want to respond to the question there, Your Excellency?
Well, we are suffering from the lack of financial support, and it's not a mistake by this cabinet in Baghdad. It's for the decade, the last decade we are suffering, and they cut our budget in 2014. At that time, we were not exporting the oil at that time. They blamed that we exported oil without any consulting with Baghdad, but it's not the right way. But the cut of the budget and the salaries of the employees in Kurdistan, it was a disaster. And the history will keep it. But we are very willingly working with the government in Baghdad, especially with the Prime Minister and all other partners inside the cabinet. And the last visit by the Prime Minister, His Excellency Masroor Barzani, to Baghdad, it was one of the best visits. And in Baghdad, he received by all of the partners. And it gives hopes to future. And I believe if this kind of relation will continue, maybe there will be hopes to have another solution. Especially the Council of Ministers in Baghdad, they decided to send for 3 months alone to Kurdistan, but there is a gap for the 3 other months to the end of the year. So we wish to solve this problem again with the Sudani cabinet and with other partners. But for how long we will stay in this situation? I will just remind everybody that our struggle in Kurdistan wasn't for the budget and the salaries. And we were there without budget and salaries. And we will be there without budget and salaries. We have a cause. We have to struggle to continue the mission. And this is a collective process for all of the Kurdistanian people, not just Kurds, who are living in Kurdistan. But to be realistic, on the ground, this situation is unaccepted. Because just look at Suleimania. People are not tolerant to this issue in different areas. So if this will lead to have more instability in Kurdistan, I believe it will affect the stability in all of the Iraq. So we have to be careful regarding this issue and launch more cooperation and more coordination. And I am confident that with the Prime Minister in Baghdad, we will be able to achieve more.
Thank you very much. We've got 10 minutes left. I'm going to try something new. I'm going to take 3 questions, just 1 question each, and no kind of stuffing around it, just directly. This gentleman here with the glasses in this 3rd row, thank you very much. You just give your name, affiliation, and question, please.
No worries. First of all, my name is Shad. I am a student at Royal Holloway University of London. I'm a politics and international relations student. My question is for Kak Reber. The Kurdistan region of Iraq shares a small border with the autonomous administration of northern East Syria, also known as Rojava. Both the Kurdistan region of Iraq and Rojava share a similar Kurdish identity, despite perhaps adopting different political strategies and governance structures. Of course, I believe it was a few months ago, the president of the PUK, Bafa Talabani, met with Mazlum Kobani in Rojava. Moreover, it must be said that there are some political similarities between the autonomous administration there and the PKK. My question in a nutshell is, how could you best describe relations with Rojava? Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. That's a good question. There's a question here on the 3rd row, just up to your, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Leah Reid from Think Research and Advisory. My question is to Mr. Abbas Al-Amiri. What are the key measures the government is taking to increase FDI? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then this gentleman in the 2nd row here. So you've got to run all the way here in a rather nice jacket.
As-salama.
Thank you. And I'll come back to you guys.
Jamil Gilson, member of Chatham House, also international lawyer. The question is directly, no comment I'm going to make, straight to you, Minister. The petrol you export from Iraq, especially Kurdistan region, through Turkey, where does that money go to?
Thank you. That's great. We've got a very direct question. Abbas, I'm going to come to you first for the question on the FDI, please. Abbas, did you?
Yeah. Yes.
Foreign direct investment. Thank you.
والله أنا لست مختصا بالاستثمار والاقتصاد، ف يعني أعتذر عن الإجابة في هذا الخصوص.
أول شخص يقول لست مختصا في هذا المجال. وهذه النعمة.
نصف العلم لا أدري.
أحسنتم.
Therefore, we have two questions for you, Your Excellency. Thank you.
I'm not so expert in oil. Regarding the Rojava or northeast of Syria, well, there is a process going on in northeast, and Syria in general is a very complicated country. And for decades, they are suffering. There were an uprising by the Kurds in northeast Syria at the beginning. But PKK, by cooperation with others in Syria, they stole the uprising from the Kurds, innocent people. And when ISIS came, they define themselves as a PYD in this area. They are the same PKK. We know all of them. They are the high members of PKK in Syria. No difference between PYD or PKK in everywhere, but for many reasons, we and other international communities and partners are supporting them just to fight against ISIS and to provide safety and security for our people in Syria. The Kurds are suffering in general in this area. Any kind of relation out of the government process, it's not the right way to deal with the situation in Syria. So we as KRG are supporting and opening the border to humanitarian aid and military support from the international partners to Syria to fight against ISIS and to provide the security. The situation in the region is more complicated, that we are very concerned about the future of Northeast. Therefore, everybody who are in the field or out the region, they have to be careful about the future of Kurds and other components in this area. Regarding the oil revenue, this question is very clear in Kurdistan, but someone is trying to complicate the situation. The progress in Kurdistan achieved, it was according to this revenue. If you just look at the budget in Kurdistan, from 2014, we received nothing to compare with our share from Baghdad. So all of the salaries, the budgets, the constructions, the developments, the supporting of the NGOs, everything achieved in Kurdistan, it was the majority of the revenue coming from the oil. And I believe, yes, maybe there is some issues to be fixed. Therefore, in this cabinet, the 9th cabinet, His Excellency Prime Minister Masroor Barzani tried to make reform in different sectors. One of the sectors was the oil and gas. So someone who are blaming now, maybe they lose their interest because of the reform process. many of people who are talking about the oil revenue, I believe they lost something through the reform process in Kurdistan. And there is a good process going on in the different sector, the administrative sector, the financial sector, the digitalization of the government. And for the first time, not just in KRI, but in Iraq in general, we established and built a data center for the government. It's a unique data center in the region. And it's the foundation to have a digital government. We started in different parts and different sectors. When it comes to the e-visa, again, it's one of the main achievements that in Iraq, still there is no e-visa, but in Kurdistan, we have our e-visa. And the driving license is very modern system, and the people can get their driver license in a very easy way and respectful way, because too many issues and too many part of the reform was the prime minister led for the 4 years past. It was how you will deliver the services to the people. It should be in a respect way and very quick, that less time, less any efforts by the people, and get the services. So there's a lot to talk about the oil revenue. And again, as I said, I am not that much expert in this issue, but I believe, and I have very accurate information, that the revenue of the oil is checked by a very professional company in the world, monthly published all of the revenues and the amount of the oil exported. If anyone is trying to know where is this amount of money or revenue of oil, there is very clear data, list of the exported oil and the list of the revenue where it goes. So it's very clear, and we are very proud of this process, and there's nothing to talk about it, because the reform will reach everywhere.
Thank you very much. We've got about 30 seconds left, and we have very strict timekeepers here, and I'll get into big trouble. But this gentleman here has been waiting very, very patiently, and I would feel very upset if he didn't ask this question. But a very short question.
You have promised.
Foreign Policy Unit, Labour Friends of Kurdistan. In the context of ongoing regional tensions, with the Kurdistan region's future tied to fluctuating regional alliances and its proximity to Iran and Turkey, how is the KRG planning to leverage these alliances for its benefit while addressing the potential threat of conflict spillover? And what preventive diplomacy is it engaging with Baghdad to ensure the region's economic and security aspirations are not compromised? In terms of your specific grievance with federation, in terms of federation,
I'm sorry,
do you think that Iraq is dissolving the KRG government status to a Kurdistan regional administration status in terms of specific grievance? Thank you.
That's a fabulous question, but you took up the full 30 seconds of the that we had. So what I'm going to do is suggest maybe you discuss that in the break. I'm really sorry, because that's going to take a good half an hour. But what I'm going to do is just before we wrap up, I just want to ask each of our speakers just to address the audience as a very simple thing. Should we feel positive at this moment about Iraq and the trajectory? I know we have a minister and we have a very senior politician there who will want to give a positive message. I mean, is the train leaving the station? If this were in the UK, the train driver will be on strike, so it will just be stuck. But should we, as for our audience, should they be taking away a positive message? Is Iraq moving forward? And I'm going to start with you, Abbas, please. You didn't hear the question? Maybe just getting a translation.
عفوا باذن الله يعني الكل يشهد بان العراق يشهد حاله استقرار لم يسبق لها مثيل منذ 2003 الى الان. هنالك تفاعل كبير بين اطراف السلطه في العراق، اقليم كردستان، المحافظات، القلب او الحكومه الاتحاديه. هنالك مشاكل كبيره، نعم نحن لازلنا في مرحله صيروره ديمقراطيه، لم نصل الى مرحله البناء الديمقراطي الصارم. هنالك شبكه عظيمه من الفساد. بصراحه يعني نحن العاملون في هذا القطاع السياسي في كل يوم ندعو الله ان يجنبنا الانزلاق وخطر هذا الآفة الكبيره، وبصراحه هي متغوله في كل البلاد. اعتقد بشكل مبسط ومختصر اننا اذا ما جنبنا مساله الحرب في المنطقه سوف يكون للعراق ان شاء الله خطوات مهمه بعد هذه السنه من الحكم.
Thank you. About 30 seconds, Minister. Yes.
I said, if there is will, there is way.
Great. Excellent. Lahib.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I will pick up something that the minister said earlier. He mentioned citizenship, Iraqi citizenship. And I think the situation that we have now and how it has evolved since 2003 quite clearly shows that the ethno-sectarian consociational system has failed. It does not correctly represent the will, the grievances, the aspirations of any Iraqi, whether they are in the south or in the Kurdistan region or in Anbar or wherever. So if there is a will, and if there is a will to change this mentality that you speak of, I think that that is precisely what the elites need to start shifting away from, because they are stuck in this idea that only Shia elites can represent Shia interests, Kurds can only represent Kurdish interests, Sunnis can only represent. It's a flawed idea.
Thank you. We're not.
I think very briefly, we're in a window. We seem to be in a window right now where the stability is there, the economics is relatively stable, and there's a political settlement, roughly. The question is, as we talked about, we've seen this before, the question is, can we have new thinking, new ways of approaching the bigger challenges of demographics? What will happen to the youth? What will happen to their employment? What will happen to the economic sector? We know the system is sustaining itself in the short term, but this is the time to be thinking about medium, longer term issues and thinking outside the box for policies to change. Otherwise, we'll be back in darker days ahead.
Thank you very much. Before we thank our speakers, I'm obliged to tell you that tea and coffee will be served. We should all reconvene here at 11:15. If you join me in thanking our speakers for an excellent panel. Thank you.